Welcome back to another video. If this is your first time here and you want to learn web development and become a better coder, start now by subscribing and clicking the bell so you don't miss anything. Alright, so in this video we'll continue exploring the CSS display property and how it affects the document flow. We'll begin by seeing that we can omit adding our custom CSS classes if the style described in that class is the default style of an element. We'll also see how to override the default behavior of the span element. By default, the span element is an inline element, but we can change it to display as a block level element. That is, we'll make it behave just like a div or an h1 behaves by default. Alright, so we've got the example that we started with in the previous video. It's called We Can Control Document Flow via CSS Display Property Part 1. And we've already seen this example. We've got two block level elements, then two spans, which are inline elements, and then another two block level elements. And this similar structure is what we're going to be using in another three examples that we have right here, which are basically the same code pen name, only with a different parts. So we've got We Can Control Document Flow via CSS Display Property Part 2, Part 3, and Part 4. And as far as the structure goes, it's quite similar to what we've already seen. And you can see that here we're just basically switching block level elements, these two at the beginning and the two at actually three in the beginning and the two in the end. We're setting them as display inline, and then in another example we're only working with the span classes, and finally here we're setting the inline and the block. We're combining the previous two examples, but let's not get ahead of ourselves and let's do it step by step. So we'll start with part 2 here and let's look into how this works. Okay, so looking at example number 2, let's first discuss this display inline, and we see that the display inline class simply holds the property of display and the value of inline. And now looking at h1, h2, and div right here, as well as these two divs in the end of this HTML structure, we can see that we've added the display inline class to each of the display block elements. And that's why all of them now are inline. And this brings us to the first conclusion, and that is we can skip a CSS class if the style described in that class is the default style of an element. So we already know that the default style for the span element is display inline. So that's the default display property on the span element. That's why we didn't need to add it right here. So we skipped it because obviously we don't have to add default behavior that's already built in. On the same note, in the next example, we've got the display block class and the property is display, the value is block. We don't have to add it to h1, h2 div right here because they are already block level elements by default. Same goes for these two elements right here, but we do need to add the display block class to all the span elements on the page if we want to make them block, right? So we've got just another span here and yet another span here, and if we change the class name to anything except the exact match of display block, what we're gonna get is we're gonna get a differently named class. Alright, so I need to log in. Okay, so let's log in. Alright, so I've logged in, and looking at the display block, this is the exact match right here for this class that's defined in the CSS right here. So if we change the name to anything else, and I prefer to add a capital X to the end of the class, we actually turn it off because there is no such thing as display block X in our CSS class definition. Alright, so that way we've turned it off, and it's much easier to just simply erase a single character that we added than it is to actually delete and then re-add the whole display-block class name. Alright, so this is the default behavior of the span tag, but since we are using the display block class, we get the result that looks as if all the elements on this web page are block level elements. Alright, so let's wait for it to save, and that's it right here. And again, I'm already logged in, so let's refresh. We have this example that combines the previous two examples. So we're adding display inline to all the block level elements, and we're adding the display block class to all the inline elements, which basically means that we've completely flipped the behavior of inline and block elements on our page, and that's why we've actually changed it based on the classes here. And this brings us to another conclusion that says, actually it's a question that says, are elements on our pages going to behave like block level or like inline elements? And the answer is that we have complete control over that. So whatever CSS class we give our elements, that's how they behave. Here we also gave an additional class of border 2 to our span elements so that it's more obvious that they're stretching the full width of the available space, or actually that they're set to display block. That's it for this video, and in the next one we're going to discuss the box model in our HTML and CSS. And this is a crucial concept to understand because the box model includes margins, padding, spacing, and so on and so forth. So stay tuned for the next part in this video series.